Hi everybody, it's Mr. M, and I'm here to talk to you today about an old dead guy named Pythagoras. And I've got a lot to say about Pythagoras because he was really interesting and really weird. But before we get started talking about Pythagoras, I want to say this is my first time doing one of these videos where I'm actually here in front of the camera. So hopefully it goes okay. Be patient with me if we have any awkward moments. All right, before we can talk about Pythagoras today, we've got to talk about something that Pythagoras loved. And one thing that Pythagoras loved is something that you could actually maybe see hidden in several places on this picture over here. One thing that Pythagoras loved is triangles. So, can you take a moment and just pause this video and think about all the different kinds of triangles that you know? Okay, so we know that there are acute triangles, obtuse triangles, right triangles, scalene triangles, isosceles triangles, equilateral triangles, all kinds of triangles out there in the universe. Pythagoras loved them all, but he liked one specific kind of triangle the best. And I can't blame him. I kind of like right triangles myself. There's something about a nice right triangle with that 90-degree angle right here that just feels right. And it kind of looks like a ramp, so if you're into any kind of action sports, you might be a fan of right triangles as well. I want to share some vocabulary with you about right triangles. First, a right triangle is called a right triangle because of that one 90-degree right angle right there. And a right triangle has two of what we call legs. Can you guess where the two legs are on this picture? If you guessed that the two legs were these two sides of the three sides of the triangle, you're right. We call these the legs of the right triangle because if you picture it as a ramp, it kind of props that triangle up. The third side is the one that has a really weird name, and this one you're going to have to remember. It's probably new to you. The third side of a right triangle is called the hypotenuse. And the hypotenuse of a right triangle is that kind of crooked side. It's the one that doesn't touch the right angle over here at all, like the two legs do. The hypotenuse usually looks kind of crooked or slanted depending on how the orientation of the right triangle is. And one thing that's really important about the hypotenuse is it's always the longest of the three sides, which if you think about it, kind of makes sense. All right, so a right triangle has two legs and a hypotenuse. And now we can get back to talking about this weirdo, Pythagoras, or Pythagoras, depending on who you talk to. Pythagoras was a Greek mathematician and philosopher. So in ancient Greece, in fact, about 500 BC, so about 2,500 years ago, the world was a very different place. This guy would go around doing geometry and stuff, and that was his job. But he also wasn't just a geometer, he was a philosopher. You know what a philosopher is, right? People who sit around and love to talk about the meaning of life and where did this all come from and who are you and who am I and what is the universe and all this kind of stuff. So he was kind of an interesting guy. He, in fact, was so good at math and so respected as a philosopher that he started a school. And people in ancient Greece would pay Pythagoras and they would send their kids to his school to learn all about Pythagoras' wisdom in the area of math, geometry, philosophy, and all kinds of other stuff too. And this school, which became called the Pythagorean School, or the School of the Pythagoreans, after Pythagoras, who started it, was an interesting place where a lot of important historical stuff happened. In fact, one of the cool things that happened with the Pythagoreans is that they helped develop the 12-note musical scale that we now use in all of Western music. And the way they developed that scale is using math. If you see this little instrument over here, that's called a lyre, and they would calculate perfect string length measurements in order to make the different strings harmonize together well, and those harmonies are what led them to a 12-note scale. Interesting. So Pythagoras has that going for him, and that's not even the thing that he's most famous for. Obviously, he's got a sweet beard going on. Good job with that. Nice work. Pythagoras was not very fond of beans, and this one may or may not be historically accurate, but we have some sources that tell us Pythagoras taught his students that every time you fart, a little piece of your soul leaves your body, never to come back again. Interesting philosophy, Pythagoras. And you can see why at his school, they ain't serving no beans, for obvious reasons. By the way, this school was more like what we would call kind of a college. The students went and lived there, and they ate together and did math together, talked about the meaning of life together. And eventually this school kind of became a little weird and cultish. So Pythagoras had a certain way that he wanted them to dress. He had a certain diet that he wanted them to eat. We even think they had secret handshakes. It got a little bizarre. The surrounding townspeople eventually came to mistrust the Pythagoreans so much that they burned down their building and drove them out of town. So there's a dark side to the story of Pythagoras, but there's also some really important history to go along with it as well. Now, Pythagoras, as I said, was Greek. And being a good Greek, he liked knowledge, he liked geometry and astronomy and all that kind of stuff, just like some people across the sea did. And so when Pythagoras was a young man, he spent some of his early years in Egypt. And this is where the story gets real interesting. So maybe it was a little study abroad program that he went on. We don't really know exactly, but we know Pythagoras, like many Greek young men, traveled to Egypt to study with the Egyptians, learn from them, then came back and brought what he learned to Greece. And that's probably part of how he became so popular as a teacher. When he was in Egypt, we know that he probably observed the best builders in the world at that time. These Egyptians knew how to build really impressive buildings. In fact, some of their buildings still stand today. The pyramids, right? The Great Pyramids of Egypt. Now, not every building that the Egyptians built was pyramid-shaped. A lot of their buildings had regular walls that went straight up and down like most of our walls do today. So I want you to think about this. If you were an Egyptian construction worker 2,500 years ago, and it was your job to make a wall perfectly upright, not 91 degrees, not 89.5 degrees, but exactly 90 degrees, because you're one of the best builders in the whole world at that time. You knew how to build buildings really good. You don't have any modern tools or technology. How are you going to make sure that that wall is perfectly right, perfectly upright, perfectly 90 degrees? Any idea? How did they do it? This was a long time ago. Well, the tool that they used, and we think Pythagoras observed them doing this, and it got him real curious, was actually just a simple rope. And so I brought a rope today to show you how the Egyptians made 90-degree angles. As you can see, I have a rope here that has knots tied in it. And if I were to hand this rope over to you and let you inspect this rope, what you would see is that this rope has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 equal segments in it. So why are the knots there? The knots are there kind of like a ruler to mark different segments of the rope. Okay, that's great. How is this going to help you make a wall stand up straight? This is the amazing thing. This is the fascinating thing. This is what we think Pythagoras observed the Egyptians doing that got his mind racing and that really changed the world. Here's how the Egyptians used a rope to make 90-degree angles. They would take the two ends of the rope and they would put them together. Let's see if I can get them to hold here. And then they would take 1, 2, 3, 4 segments of the rope. Then they would count 1, 2, 3 more segments of the rope. And somehow the Egyptians figured out that that would always make a right triangle. And if it's a right triangle, then you've got yourself a right angle right here. And you could do that on the ground with your bricks as you were building up the wall to make sure that your bricks were stacked upright. And that's how the Egyptians built really good walls. And that's how 3, 4, 5 makes a right triangle. So the 3 segments, the 4 segments, and the 5 segments, and you could go 4 down, 3 across, or you could go 3 down, 4 across. It would work either way. You can test this at home if you want to, right? Take that rope, take that measurement. 3, 4, 5 always makes a right triangle. And Pythagoras was like, wow, what's so magical about 3, 4, 5? And he went back to Greece and he wondered, and he even got all of his students to wonder with him. What is it so magical about 3, 4, 5? Wait, maybe numbers. I forgot to tell you. Pythagoras and his followers believed that numbers were magical. In fact, they even kind of worshipped numbers. Is that all weird? They especially liked ratios. And this 3, 4, 5 isn't like a ratio exactly with 2 numbers compared to each other, but it's kind of like a 3-number ratio. They liked to compare numbers to each other like the string lengths of their instruments that made these beautiful sounds. They thought that numbers could create beauty and that somehow harmony in the universe was tied to these numbers, and so they worshipped numbers. And it was kind of bizarre to us, but to them it seemed perfectly natural. So for Pythagoras to discover that 3, 4, 5 magically always made a right triangle was beyond fascinating. And they wondered, would 1, 2, 3 work? Would 2, 3, 4 work? Would 7, 8, 9 work? How else could we build right triangles out of 3 numbers? Well, I guess we're ancient Greek people 2,500 years ago. The only choice we have, we can't Google it. We just got to draw triangles with different side lengths and see if they make a right triangle. So they tried 1, 2, 3. Do you think it made a right triangle? You could try it if you want to. It didn't. It made a triangle. Well, sometimes it didn't even make a triangle. Sometimes it made an acute triangle or an obtuse triangle. They wanted a right triangle. So they tried 2, 3, 4. That didn't work either. They tried 1, 2, 4. Didn't work. They tried 5, 6, 7. That didn't work. And every time they tried and failed, they thought 3, 4, 5 was even more magical and special. They got real crazy and just started testing every combination of numbers they could. 17, 22, 29. It didn't work either. And so every day, Pythagoras and all his Pythagorean people are drawing triangles and trying to make them turn into right triangles and trying to figure out what numbers worked and what numbers didn't work. And most of the time it didn't work. Almost all the time it didn't work. Except every once in a while, there were numbers that did work. For some reason, 5, 12, 13 did make a right triangle. And 11, 60, 61 made a right triangle. Isn't that weird and interesting? And 13, 84, 85 did make a right triangle. Can you imagine how many fails they probably had to do before they got to one that actually worked? But eventually they kept a log of all the triples that didn't work and all the triples that did work. But what did they do with that information? It was still a mystery. Why did the ones that failed fail? And why did the ones that work? What's going on here? Their mystical approach to numbers and math made them think that there was something maybe behind the scenes going on here. And so I want you to see if you can figure out what's the mystery. Why does 3, 4, 5 always work? Why does 5, 12, 13 make a right triangle? Why doesn't 5, 6, 7 make a right triangle? Can you think of any rhyme or reason? Is there any way to crack the code and get to the mystery of these Pythagorean triples that did work versus all the other triples that didn't work? So think about that, ponder that, and tomorrow, if you're lucky, maybe I'll give you the answer. Have a great day. Thanks for listening and watching. See you tomorrow.